Hello world, this is Safari Nzuri. I'm your host, Ashley White. Today I'll be talking about a serious subject, the subject of racism. I will have 5 beautiful guests later that will join me, and we will be speaking and dissecting the subject of racism. And before we get into it, I want to give you a brief history lesson. Starting in 1619, the first set of slaves were coming to America, and that was before it was like called the States or anything, but that's the first time that they came to this land. And they were taken from Africa and they were brought here. And then 1739, that was the first attempt of slaves trying to get their freedom, trying to escape. And so they got 50 people together and they tried to march and claim like territory. And then in 1775, you had Thomas Paine. He published an anti-slavery tract. And that was the first attempt of trying to address slavery as not being good for our states. 1776, Thomas Jefferson had put anti-slavery inside of the Declaration of Independence, but then it was later deleted. They took it out of the Declaration of Independence. Then from 1775 to 1782 was the Revolutionary War, and that was British against America. And in 1780, Massachusetts grants African Americans the right to vote. African Americans were feeling like if we pay taxes, then we need to have the right to vote. And this was only in Massachusetts. 1789, the U.S. Constitution adopted slaves, and they were only counted as three-fifths of a person. So you wasn't, myself, I wouldn't be represented as just a individual person. It would be me and some of my friends or siblings, or hopefully some people that I knew. 1859, that was the last slave ship that came into the States, and that's when they didn't accept slave trade at all anymore. During this whole time, we were having the Civil War going on from 1861 to 1865, and it was the northern states against the southern states. Northern states were the ones that declared slaves free, so we were free in the northern states. And then southern states, we wanted to keep slaves and keep having slaves. So during this time, the Emancipation Proclamation, slaves would be free from the rebellious states. That's what Abraham Lincoln wanted, but it didn't happen until later on. 1865, the abolition of slavery, and that was only if only except for like people that did petty crimes. And this is when mass incarceration has started, and that targeted black people. So it was another form of slavery, but they didn't have it until later on. Well, they won't say that until now. It's now that we're speaking about it, and that being like the beginning point when they tried to abolish slavery. And then going to 1865, the states rejected the 15th Amendment, giving African Americans the right to vote. 1870, now we can vote. They ratified the 15th Amendment, but Jim Crow laws, they had different laws in there where you had to take the test in order to be able to vote. And most of the time in most states, southern states, they wouldn't even allow you even if you passed all the questions, you still weren't allowed to vote. 1890, we had the first poll tax, and that with African Americans, they couldn't even afford that taxation. So we still weren't allowed to vote. So it was always these little things inside of the system. In 1954, we had the Brown versus the Board of Education, which led to desegregations in schools. And then 1964, Civil Rights Act, Lyndon B. Johnson prohibited discrimination in public places. So businesses, and part of Jim Crow laws, like we had to have the separation, so separate water fountains, separate places of eating. We ate in the back. When we rode the buses, we were in the back. So it was all these separation things. Even though we got detached from slavery, we were still trying to be seen as equal. And this was all the way in 1964. And so some of our parents were during that time. And then you have our voting rights being able to, started in 1965. And then that was also in 1965, we had Bloody Sunday, and it was 17 to 50 people who were injured. One was a woman who was almost beaten to death, and this is when Martin Luther King and some other great names, they marched on Selma, and they didn't want us getting the right to vote and like just the right to be seen as a human being, an equal human being, and not seen as a threat, because we weren't, but it's something that we always had to fight. And then a lot of people have been speaking on Martin Luther King, but he was assassinated even though he tried to protest with peace and protest in a way that we were able to be seen and not seen as a violent person. And we were not, that wasn't even in our blood. And as you can see, as you look at all the Black history, we were taken from a place to another land, and that while we were in that land, we were not considered free, we were considered property. And so even up until this point, we are still fighting some of those simple rights just to be seen as an equal person. And that's with different people. And it's not with everybody. We have made a lot of progress. I'm not going to say that we have been stagnant in progress, but we have made a lot of progress, but there's still this evil of racism that we're still dealing with, the systematic racism and all those things that we're still dealing with right now. And so we're going to talk about that and dissect it in different ways. We'll address it, and all of my girls, we will try to give you the best answers for stuff that a lot of people are saying, like asking for and trying to get a better view on. But I'm excited to talk about this, but I just wanted to give you a background of where we came from and then now where we're trying to go, and that's to be one unified country.